Now we're going to consider a couple of different scenarios whereby we have a leak in the cryotagger system, how to detect it, how to locate it, how to repair it. And what I have here is a compressor with a couple of lines connected, and we're going to assume that with all assembled, we suspect that there's a leak in the system because our pressure diminishes over time. In that case, we would use the electronic leak detector to try to determine where the leak is coming from. And we can determine it's coming, say, from this fitting, but we don't know exactly which seal is defective. Obviously, for the PT30 gas, we'll be using the combustible leak detector. For NF50 gas, we'll be using the refrigeration gas detector. Now, to further troubleshoot it, we're going to loosen and remove this fitting. And then we can cap it. By this cap, we eliminate the face seal as a potential source of the leak. And by capping this side, we eliminate any leakage from the valve assembly, and we can check for a leak in the O-ring. Now, if we find that with a further inspection that our leaks are gone, we suspect the face seal, we can easily replace the face seal by just taking some tweezers or a similar tool and pulling it out and slipping in a replacement. This is the simplest repair job because we don't lose any refrigerant. Now, if you happen to not have a store of face seals, you can always take the seal out of one of the male plugs. It's the same gasket as the face seal used there, and so in a pinch, you can use that. Another comment on these caps. The valves are not perfect. They leak a little bit of gas continuously. So whenever you have a fitting that's not joined, when it's disconnected, you want to keep those caps and plugs in place to prevent the loss of your refrigerant. Okay. Now, if rather than the face seal, it's determined that the leak is instead at the O-ring, this is going to require removing the fitting, which involves purging, discharging the gas that's in it, and then changing the O-ring, which is a simple operation. Then re-evacuating the line and recharging. Now we're going to cover evacuation and recharging a bit later. For venting, use the same tool as we have for the evacuation. It's simply a male fitting on a 1/4-inch tube. And so if we tighten this, the gas will discharge through the tube. The PT30 gas is flammable, and it should be discharged either outdoors or in a building exhaust vent. It is enough gas to be of a concern for fire danger. So make sure you exhaust it in a safe place, and of course no sources of ignition nearby. So once the refrigerant is exhausted, then 2 5/8" wrenches can be used to dismantle and the O-ring changed. You can follow the assembly instructions in the AirEquip catalog. Again, using the vacuum grease very lightly on the O-ring, just a sheen on the surface. Wipe off any visible grease using the clean room wipe. A very small drop near the ends of the threads of the Loctite. O-ring in place, fitting back on, retighten with the wrenches, and then move on to the evacuation and recharge. Now, the other scenario that sometimes happens is you are taking a hose off, breaking a fitting, and suddenly gas starts pouring out. And usually this is not a small leak, it's a gush of refrigerant. And what's happened is one of the 2 valve assemblies has failed. First thing to do, quickly just retighten it. Stop the gas from flowing, and then sit back and figure out what our next step is. Sometimes there's a bit of panic when this happens because it is a gush of gas, and there's a pause long enough for the entire system to discharge and all the refrigerant is lost. No need for that. Simply retighten the fitting, gather your wits, and figure out what to do next. And in this case, if we don't know which valve has failed, then what we want to do is isolate these 2 components. So in this case, for the compressor end, I would take off this hose, and for the hose, I would disconnect it at the other end of whatever it's connected to. Now once that's done, we'll be ready to break the fitting where the leak is. We're going to lose refrigerant. Again, it's flammable. It should be done in a place either outdoors or where there's a exhaust vent to exhaust the gas. And now we'll have a good idea of which side has a leak. Either this seal will have become displaced, will be bulging out, and the gas will be leaking out there, or there will be a bulge in the face, in this rubber seal face, and it'll be cracked and gas will be coming out there. So we'll have an idea of what needs to be replaced. Now assume that in this case that we find the leak is here in the in the valve assembly on the hose. Again, we have to take the fitting apart and change the valve assembly in this case. So, same procedure. Fitting comes apart. In this case, I would suggest you take the time to go ahead and replace the O-ring, and we'll replace the valve assembly just by pushing out the old one. And installing a new one. Then reassembling. Now our hose has been exposed to air. It has both air and water vapor in it. It will need to be re-evacuated before recharging. To evacuate, we use the same tool as before. We make the connection. Tighten. And then connect to the vacuum pump. Same vacuum pump you would use for evacuating the camera, whether it be a rough pump or a turbo pump. And now we start the vacuum pump, leave it operating for several hours. I suggest 8 hours. Overnight is a good time, but we need to remove the water vapor that's attached to the sidewalls of the hose. After evacuation, simply take this fitting apart. The two valves will close and prevent the loss of the vacuum. So once it comes apart, the vacuum pump is still running this entire time. The valve closes, no air gets into the vacuum pump, and no air gets into the hose. Now once that's done, we simply reconnect the hose to the system, and when we do this, we're going to get refrigerant moving from the rest of the system into the hose, and it's going to lower the pressure of the system. There it went. And now the entire system has low pressure. Then the thing to do is simply reconnect all the components of the system and recharge the system with whatever tools you have available for doing that, whichever recharge kit you have, the Brooks recharge kit or the one provided by Spectral. And just a comment about the face seals. The reason it's recommended to use the 5/8 and the 3/4 inch wrench is to keep the two sides of the fitting from rotating against each other. That will damage the face seal. If you use the dry Teflon lubricant, then the fittings go on fairly easily, and you only need to use the 5/8 wrench to hold it at the very last part of tightening it. Okay, so we recharge our system back up to our normal operating pressure and retest for leaks. Everything good, we're back in business. And we've accomplished our leak repair.